On a stormy Tuesday morning in October of 1994, a massive 100-acre swamp in the lower valley was actively swallowing a fleet of million-dollar construction machines, and the corporate engineers were completely panicking. Their expensive electronic pumps had either caught fire or automatically shut down, leaving the entire real estate project to drown in the deep black mud. The situation was an absolute disaster, and the only hope left rested in the calloused hands of a quiet old farmer named Boyd. He did not bring a computerized lifesaver. He brought a massive, rusted, steam-powered pump that he had bought for exactly $60 from an industrial scrapyard. Let me tell you exactly how a forgotten relic from the early 20th century crushed impenetrable mud, saved a multi-million-dollar development, and delivered a humiliating lesson in raw mechanical torque to the most arrogant engineers in the state. Let me tell you about Boyd, because you need to understand the man before you can appreciate the terrifying mechanical beast he brought to that swamp. Boyd was a quiet man who had spent his entire life farming the rocky, unforgiving land right on the edge of the valley basin. He was not a wealthy man, but he possessed a deep mechanical genius and an absolute refusal to let good iron die. A few years before the corporate developers arrived, Boyd was walking through an overgrown industrial scrapyard when he spotted a massive shape buried under rusted sheet metal. It was a giant centrifugal water pump powered by a heavy steam engine built somewhere in the early 1900s. The machine was originally designed for deep mining operations, meant to move thick, heavy sludge without ever clogging. It had been abandoned decades ago, but Boyd saw its true value. He handed over exactly $60 to the scrap dealer and dragged the heavy iron frame back to his farm. Boyd spent the entire brutal winter alone in his drafty workshop rebuilding the forgotten beast. He hand-forged new steel fittings, repaired the heavy cast-iron impellers, and painstakingly restored the massive boiler. He did not add any delicate sensors or automatic shut-off switches, because steam power does not ask for permission to work. When he finally fired it up, the ground physically shook, and the steam whistle echoed across the entire valley. Boyd simply parked the restored monster in his barn, covered it with a heavy canvas tarp, and went back to his farming. Then the corporate real estate developers arrived. They had purchased the 100-acre sunken basin right next to the property line of Boyd. The corporate project manager was a loud, arrogant man who rolled into the valley with a fleet of million-dollar excavators, towering cranes, and a dozen highly advanced diesel water pumps packed with delicate digital sensors. He proudly announced that his state-of-the-art technology would drain the entire swamp in absolute record time. He believed that having the most money and the newest microchips guaranteed success. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever watched someone with an expensive degree walk right into a disaster because they refused to respect the land they were standing on? That is exactly what Boyd was watching. The project manager had absolutely no idea what kind of thick, aggressive clay and tangled root systems were hiding beneath that black water. And he certainly had no idea that a quiet old farmer next door was watching his shiny new equipment with a $60 steam-powered monster just waiting for the inevitable disaster. The corporate team wasted absolutely no time. By the second morning, they had deployed a massive array of state-of-the-art diesel water pumps all along the edge of the swamp. These were not ordinary construction pumps. They were highly sophisticated machines equipped with digital flow meters, automated intake valves, and delicate electronic sensors specifically designed to monitor water density and protect the expensive engines from overheating, catastrophic failure. The project manager stood on the muddy bank with a clipboard in his hand, directing his team of college-educated engineers as they dropped the pristine plastic intake hoses deep into the dark, murky water. He was entirely convinced that his millions of dollars in modern technology would have the entire basin sucked bone dry before the end of the week. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever watched a disaster unfolding in slow motion, knowing exactly what was going to happen, but the experts, with all their expensive degrees, absolutely refused to listen to you? That is exactly where Boyd found himself. He had lived next to that swamp his entire life, and he knew exactly what was hiding beneath the surface of the black water. It was not just liquid. The bottom of that basin was lined with a thick, aggressive layer of heavy clay, packed tightly around a dense underground network of ancient rotting tree roots and jagged limestone rocks. It was a brutal, impenetrable soup of heavy sludge that would easily choke any modern machine trying to drink it too fast. Boyd decided to do the neighborly thing. He walked across the property line wearing his grease-stained overalls and approached the corporate command trailer. He politely introduced himself to the project manager and offered a gentle, honest warning about the severe conditions of the swamp. He explained that the thick clay and hidden roots would rapidly clog their delicate plastic intake hoses. He suggested that they might want to use something with a bit more raw mechanical force, and he even offered to bring over his restored $60 steam-powered pump to help them clear the heaviest sludge without breaking their new equipment. The project manager stopped looking at his clipboard and stared at the quiet old farmer. Then he started to laugh out loud. Let me tell you about that laugh because it is important to the story. It was a loud, obnoxious laugh that instantly drew the attention of the surrounding corporate engineers. They gathered around the trailer and joined in snickering at the old man in his dirty work clothes. The manager pointed a finger at Boyd and openly mocked his offer. He asked if the old farmer seriously believed that a piece of rusted $60 junk from the Stone Age could outwork a fleet of brand new computerized diesel pumps. He proudly declared that his equipment was continuously monitored by advanced microchips and operated by men with expensive engineering degrees. He told Boyd to go back to his little dirt farm and leave the real multi-million-dollar development work to the highly educated professionals. Boyd did not argue. He did not raise his voice or try to explain the fundamental difference between delicate electronic sensors and raw, unstoppable mechanical torque. He just looked at the arrogant manager, looked at the shiny new pumps humming softly by the water, and nodded his head. He turned around and walked quietly back to his barn, leaving the corporate team to their completely misplaced confidence. Boyd knew exactly what heavy clay did to delicate plastic impellers, and he knew that it was only a matter of time before the swamp fought back against the modern world. The arrogant project manager gave the signal, and his team of engineers fired up the massive array of computerized diesel pumps. At first, the modern technology performed exactly like the glossy factory brochures promised. The powerful machines hummed smoothly, sucking thousands of gallons of surface water out of the swamp every single minute. The water level began to drop rapidly, and the corporate team spent the first 2 days congratulating themselves. The project manager stood by his air-conditioned trailer drinking coffee and feeling completely vindicated. He was certain that he had successfully conquered nature with a sufficiently large checkbook. Now, let me tell you what happens when expensive engineering meets ancient stubborn nature, because this is where the millions of dollars started to burn. As the third day dawned, the water level dropped low enough to expose the true bottom of the basin. This was not just dirty water. It was an aggressive, thick soup of heavy clay, ancient rotting tree roots, and jagged limestone rocks. As the delicate plastic intake hoses sucked closer to the bottom, they began pulling in this brutal mixture. This is exactly when the sophisticated electronic technology decided to completely turn against the developers. The brand new diesel pumps were equipped with advanced flow meters and highly sensitive internal sensors designed to prevent mechanical damage. The moment the thick, heavy sludge hit the spinning plastic impellers, the sensors detected a massive spike in resistance. The onboard computers instantly recognized the extreme danger to the expensive engines. In a fraction of a second, the automated safety protocols engaged. One by one, the advanced pumps automatically cut their own power and shut down completely. A chorus of warning sirens echoed across the mud as digital dashboard screens flashed urgent error codes. Let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever watched a desperate man make the worst possible decision simply because his pride refused to accept defeat? The project manager could not afford to lose a single day on his strict multi-million-dollar construction schedule. He ordered his college-educated engineers to manually bypass the safety sensors and force the machines to keep running. The engineers frantically typed commands into their laptops, overriding the protective algorithms. They forced the diesel engines back to life, demanding maximum power against the immovable sludge. It was a catastrophic mistake. Without the computer sensors to protect them, the modern machines literally tore themselves apart. The heavy clay and rocks violently shattered the delicate plastic impellers inside the intake housings. The diesel engine screamed under the impossible load, overheating within minutes. Thick plumes of white and black smoke erupted from the shiny new pumps as expensive internal seals blew out and engine blocks warped from the extreme heat. Within an hour, the entire fleet of state-of-the-art water pumps was completely destroyed, reduced to smoking, useless heaps of melted plastic and ruined metal. Then the sky turned dark black. A sudden, massive late summer thunderstorm rolled over the valley, unleashing a torrential downpour. Without any working pumps to push the water out, the basin immediately began filling up again. The rain was relentless, causing flash floods that cascaded down the muddy banks directly toward the fleet of million-dollar excavators and heavy cranes that were parked deep inside the bowl. The water was rising inches every minute, threatening to completely submerge and destroy the entire corporate investment. The project manager stood in the pouring rain, completely helpless, watching his multi-million-dollar operation sink into the very mud he had promised to conquer. The rain was still coming down in absolute sheets when a new sound cut entirely through the roar of the storm. It was not the high-pitched whine of a modern diesel starter. It was a piercing, terrifying shriek that echoed off the valley walls. The corporate engineers turned around and stared through the pouring rain. Rolling slowly down the muddy access road was Boyd, driving his old farm tractor and dragging the exact same piece of rusted heavy iron that the project manager had laughed at just days before. The $60 steam-powered pump was fully alive. Thick black smoke billowed from its stack, and the massive boiler radiated an intense heat that fought back the cold storm. Boyd did not ask for permission to enter the site. He did not stop to talk to the panicked project manager. He drove the heavy mechanical beast right to the edge of the rising floodwaters, set the heavy iron brakes, and climbed down into the mud. Without saying a single word to the stunned corporate crew, he dragged the massive cast iron intake pipe directly into the thickest part of the aggressive clay swamp. Then he walked back to the machine, grabbed the heavy steel throttle wheel, and opened the steam valve wide open. Let me tell you about the next few minutes, because they are the exact reason this story is still being told today. There were no delicate electronic sensors to measure the density of the sludge. There were no microchips programmed to protect the machine from extreme stress. The $60 steam pump only understood one fundamental law of physics, which was to transfer massive pressure into pure, unstoppable rotational torque. The heavy cast iron impeller inside the massive pump housing began to spin. Now let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever seen what happens when raw, unfiltered mechanical power meets an immovable object and simply refuses to quit? The ground physically shook as the ancient machine took the full load of the swamp. It did not pull just water, it pulled everything. Thick, heavy clay, rotting ancient tree roots, jagged limestone rocks, and dense, aggressive sludge were sucked violently into the heavy intake pipe. If this had been a modern plastic pump, it would have shattered instantly. But Boyd had restored a machine built in an era when things were over-engineered for deep, brutal industrial mining. The massive cast iron impeller blades simply crushed the rocks and chewed through the roots, violently spitting a terrifying geyser of black mud and heavy debris out the massive discharge pipe. The steam engine screamed under the impossible load, vibrating so violently that it looked like it was going to tear itself apart, but the heavy hand forged steel rivets held perfectly. Boyd stood in the pouring rain, constantly feeding thick wood and coal into the roaring firebox, refusing to let the pressure drop. For 48 straight hours, the piercing whistle of the steam engine dominated the valley. It ran continuously through the day and the night, never stalling, never pausing, and never asking a computer for permission to keep working. By the morning of the third day, the deafening sound of the pump finally spooled down. The storm had passed, and the early sun broke through the clouds, revealing an absolutely unbelievable sight. The entire 100-acre swamp had been sucked completely dry right down to the hard bedrock. The fleet of million-dollar excavators and towering cranes sat perfectly safe on the exposed bottom, completely rescued from the floodwaters. The project manager and his entire team of highly educated engineers stood on the bank in absolute stunned silence. They were staring at a quiet old farmer covered in black soot and grease who was calmly wiping down his machine. Their millions of dollars in advanced computerized technology had melted down in a matter of hours, but a $60 pile of rusted scrap iron had just brutally conquered nature and saved their entire corporate investment. The profound humiliation hanging in the morning air was absolute.
Let me tell you what happened next. The project manager walked across the dried mud, offering Boyd a massive check and trying to buy the steam pump right there. Boyd refused the money. He simply told the manager never to underestimate old iron or the farmers who know the land. Then he towed his heavy beast home. Let me share something essential. Modern engineering is brilliant, but it is designed to protect itself by shutting down in extreme danger. Vintage iron was built differently. Old machines do not ask a microchip for permission to work. They are built to finish the brutal task, no matter the cost. The story of Boyd and his $60 pump is a carefully crafted fiction inspired by the real victories of traditional farmers outworking modern technology. If you appreciate the raw power of old iron, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share your stories of vintage machinery in the comments below because every acre has a story and we want to hear yours.